Hey, guy, and don't ask me how. Don't say how are you. Just let's get right to it. Yeah, I know. Look shocked. I know.
Oh, I hope you're not doing well.
Okay.
You're so difficult to produce.
All right. Welcome to the Danny Savalas Show, where the law meets the headlines. I'm your host, Danny Savalas, along with my co-host, Sara Gannon.
Hey, Guy.
Hey, guy.
I can't say how's it going? Okay.
Sure.
How's it going?
It's going great. I'm glad to be here.
It's been a brutal week.
It's been a crazy news week, that's for sure.
Much of the country is thawing out after this massive snowstorm that impacted like 2/3 of the country. But the snow is not the biggest concern. The biggest concern we have right now is ice.
It sure is.
It's news that affects us all. And it's pretty much our whole show today. Let's kick us off.
The internet is ablaze with new camera angles, new video, and everybody's analyzing it. I have to tell you, I have not seen a case of police brutality, and you and I have both covered a lot of police brutality cases. I haven't seen this level of interest, commentary, and divisiveness. This is one of those cases where two sides of the country see the same video and come to dramatically different conclusions.
It's interesting you say that because I actually thought that this was a little bit of a shift in that people were bucking the ideological trends a bit and saying like, I'm going to trust my own eyes. I'm going to see what I see. One of the things I wanted to raise here that I think is a little bit different than what I'm hearing though in the commentary, most of the commentary is focused on the narrative, which is obviously very interesting, especially from a media perspective. I actually did a bunch of research on this for a different podcast one time about how police PR machines shape the early narrative of how we see things.
Boy, that is this case.
Of course, right? Or at least the attempt to. But one thing that you said to me, and actually this goes back to our dinner table conversation when Renee Good was shot and killed. You said to me that this case or this situation that's unfolding in Minneapolis, you said, this is one of my greatest fears. And I remember that because I said, why? You know, there's so many bad things that we talk about and cover. Like, why is this one of your greatest fears? And you said that this conflict between how local authorities see what's happening and what federal authorities see is happening could lead to a constitutional crisis. And then after Alex Preddy was killed, the first thing you said to me was, again, this is my greatest fear. This is going to be a constitutional crisis. I want to hear from you today. Why is this such a big deal from that perspective?
Because we may have a situation, and I think in the case of the shooting of Alex Preddy, I believe we will have a situation where local or state prosecutors will seek to charge the agents, the federal agents who were involved in the shooting. And when that happens, there is going to be a major conflict and possibly, and you know, we've talked about this. I hate declaring constitutional crisis because I feel like people on TV declare it every other week. But to me, a constitutional crisis is a conflict that the Constitution simply doesn't have an answer for, although it kind of does. So if the police officers, if Minnesota law enforcement sought to arrest these agents, these federal agents, then almost certainly what the federal government would do would be to file to toss their cases. It goes back to a case called In re Nagel. And essentially, if federal officers are in their law enforcement capacity performing their duties, they're virtually immune from prosecution. Now, the concern there, obviously, is that if a Democratic administration is the next administration, that immunity may not mean much if they seek to at least allow state authorities to prosecute these agents. That is a possibility as well. But the Constitution really doesn't tell us what happens if Minnesota says, the heck with your assertion of federal immunity. We're arresting these guys because what they did went beyond, and it is murder in Minnesota, which we have jurisdiction over. So what happens if, for example, they issue arrest warrants? What happens if they put them on NCIC and now they can't really travel and there are open warrants for these agents? What happens then? Because almost certainly they would be stopped at some point, picked up, and then what does the federal government do? To me, it's got the potential for a crisis. And it's made worse by the fact that the federal government, like they did in the Renee Good case, came out early and defended the agents. So that sort of paints the federal government into a corner in this case.
Does it have major implications for like the future of our government? Is this one of those cases that we're going to be studying and talking about in law schools for years? Is it going to be the next, I don't know, the one that comes to mind is like Brown v. Board of Education? Because it feels like the only remedy is something we've never seen before. It would be something unprecedented.
Yeah, see, I think we're living in an era where we have a Brown v. Board of Education every week. And I think there's so many of these momentous cases. Let me give an example. The Supreme Court's decision on presidential immunity last year was an earth-shattering case. We don't even really talk about it anymore. And I've said this many times, no matter what side of the political aisle you're on, the unintended benefit of Trump administrations has been that we get litigated and we get answers to constitutional questions that we never thought litigated before. And the example I always give is the emoluments clause. Who the heck knew what that was? I didn't even when it came out. It has to do with the Constitution. There are two constitutional prohibitions for presidents essentially receiving gifts that could be perceived as bribery from outsiders. But who even heard of that until the Trump administration? So the same thing with immunity. Presidential immunity was litigated last year. I believe it was a non-positive consequence because I don't think any of us ever really wanted to define what presidential immunity was because there is no right answer to that question. So too here. We may find out what in the world happens because historically, anytime law enforcement wants to be prosecuted, law enforcement wants to prosecute one of their own, everyone's on board, federal, state authorities, everyone. And it's not unprecedented for state authorities to charge federal employees. That's not unusual, and they could do it for a number of reasons. A federal agent could commit a DUI on his personal time, but for someone carrying out their law enforcement duties to be arrested for homicide by state authorities, where the federal government says, no, they are immune and they are innocent, and also justified, which is a separate legal argument. Mm-hmm. That would be something that is unprecedented. And that's another one of those words that gets thrown around a lot here. But I think we can safely say that it would essentially, under these facts, be something that is brand new. And it could really create a conflict. I sense it already going that direction. What if local law enforcement decides to forcibly eject ICE agents? What if they get that order? What if ICE agents get an order that they perceive to be unconstitutional? There are a lot of things that can happen.
The National Guard starts trying to arrest or interfere in the work that they're doing. I wonder, is this going to lead to like a competition of creativity? Like who can, I don't want to say get away with it, but like, I said a couple of episodes ago, it got a lot of heat online that I thought that the ICE agent who fired the shots that killed Renee Good would end up in like a form of witness protection.
Sure.
That they were going to disappear the guy,
sure.
And that was how it was going to end. But like, from the other perspective, you could see Minnesota being creative with the law since it is ambiguous, since there is a lot of gray area and nuance here. Who can be most creative to get their perspective to win? To get their...
You mean to prosecute agents?
Yeah, like if state prosecutors can figure out a way to prosecute the agents, or on the flip side, if the federal government can figure out a way to stop them. Because it's not clear cut. It's going to end up being who can be more creative with the facts that they're given.
Yes, except that the creativity doesn't matter when the federal government asserts its supremacy clause powers. It becomes a giant Bigfoot, like a giant Yeti that stomps.
Oh, so you're saying there's nothing that they could do, the state of Minnesota could do to win?
By win, you mean prosecute these agents, arrest and prosecute them? Well, that's again the interesting part to me, because in theory, the federal government can simply go to federal district court, and say, you have to enjoin this prosecution because they're immune and we're the federal government, and that's that. And presumably that's what would happen. So I don't think local authorities would disregard a federal court order. But what happens in the interim?
What if they do?
Well, see, I try to assume that's not what, but you're right. In the Trump era, there's a version of that. So many
strange things happen, right?
Yeah, but there's a version where it's not open defiance, where the Trump administration's really good at this. They say they're complying with an order, but they have some strange reading of the language.
But the flip of that, you could look at a non-political issue or a less political issue. Cannabis laws, for example. The federal government has said cannabis laws legalization of cannabis is not recognized by the federal government.
Yeah, exactly.
But states have just said, so what? We're making it legal.
Right.
So there are situations where the states say, basically, F you.
Yeah, and I think that cannabis example is one of a major problem in federalism and the relationship between the state and federal governments. I don't think the federal government should have ever just said, oh, well, everyone's doing it, therefore we won't enforce this huge body of law. Don't get me wrong, I'm a criminal defense attorney. I don't necessarily think that marijuana should be illegal, but the fact remains that it currently is. It's been descheduled, but the point is, you're right. That creates a constitutional problem. If the solution to marijuana laws was just, we'll forget we have these laws. That's not the way the system is supposed to work. So you bring up a good point. I mean, what do we do if they try to prosecute? And I do believe they will try to prosecute these agents. And we can go through an analysis of the use of force in this case, because it actually is a little more complicated than it may
I was
look.
going to bring that up, actually, but I wanted to just stay on this topic for a second, because if you go back historically, I think, for example, the drinking age in the U.S. used to be 18. Many states decided to follow guidance from the federal government to move to 21. But a lot of states, particularly in the South, did not. They wanted to keep it at 18. And the reason that they got eventually to 21 was that the federal government said, fine, we're not going to give you money for, I think it had something to do with highways. Yeah. And they needed the money. And so they eventually complied. I mean, is that the power that the federal government has in situations like these? Could they say to Minnesota, okay, fine, you're going to try to prosecute these guys. We're going to punish you with some sort of, in some sort of monetary way? I mean, what does it mean when there is a constitutional crisis? What's the leverage that the feds have?
Well, you bring up a really interesting form of leverage. Now, that state that you were talking about was Louisiana. Louisiana was the last holdout. It wanted to keep its drinking age under 21. But they thought they could make a go of it, but everybody needs those highway funds. So Louisiana capitulated. And it's interesting because what you just described is quietly one of the broadest powers the federal government has, but it's not a power to say, thou shalt do something, states. It's called the spending power. And what the federal government might not be able to do by force, by saying, thou shalt do something, states, they can do by waiving money in front of the states, by conditioning funds. It has long been a bedrock constitutional power that the federal government has the power, the spending power, to compel states to do things. Now, it has to be an act of Congress. It has to be a lawful exercise of that power. But once they use it, that is a classic example of the spending power. So you're right. They could threaten in some way the state of Minnesota or local municipalities, and Trump does that fairly often, with withholding funds. Then you get into a discussion of, well, if Congress earmarked funds and directed them, that might be an issue. But you're right in that, generally speaking, the federal government as a whole has this spending power, which in many ways it's sort of the principle of catching more flies with honey than vinegar, that you can force states to do things because they need that federal money so badly. So that is an option for the federal government. But the thing about the spending power, it's a power that the states can always reject, in a sense. They can say, well, thanks for your offer, but we're going to go
find that money elsewhere.
You'll find it. I mean, even if they don't, they can say no.
But this is kind of like right in Trump's wheelhouse. He likes to use that business angle. He likes to punish people monetarily.
Sure.
And he likes to use that as leverage. I could see, and he has no problem doing stuff that hasn't been done before, or that's seldom done, or that people think might be outside of the box a little bit, in terms of what we deem to be acceptable in Washington. So, I mean, I could see him.
Of course. Yeah, I see Trump. The one thing about this administration, they're creative. They've got a team of people, it seems, poring over the actual words in statutes and finding, I mean, they're the most amazing loophole finding administration I've ever imagined could exist. They're very good. I mean, one thing you cannot say about them is that they haven't studied the law, because they find every loophole, every area of potential expansion, every gray area, every part of a statute that has wiggle room. They are exceptional at finding it. The Insurrection Act is a good example. They found this vague language that is very powerful, very broad, and they exploit it in a way that no other president has in the past. So yes, in that sense, if you're going to give an advantage, if you're going to handicap this, then you give the advantage to the administration, because they are not afraid to dust off arcane areas of the law and weaponize them.
And in your opinion, what does Minnesota have to do to make this a successcourt case for them?
You mean in terms of their burden of proof, or in terms of even getting jurisdiction?
Getting jurisdiction, getting this to court. Like, how do they get this to court?
So here, okay, jurisdiction-wise, in other words, avoiding the claim of immunity, not talking about the burden of proof, actually proving the case.
No, I think that is a whole different conversation.
I think you have to engage in, there are two ways to do it. You can engage in negotiation with the administration, because it seems like Trump is willing, at least somewhat willing, to back off of ICE's original response to this, which I think everybody agrees just isn't supported by what's in the video, right? The initial response is that Alex Preddy approached them brandishing a firearm. I mean, like, nothing, that is simply not true. And the fact that they would open with that, they've lost the credibility of anybody who listens to their releases. I mean, that's really problematic for them, in my view. I mean, I think of losing credibility. Once you lose credibility, you're out. And you may say, well, in politics, nobody has any. But this is a provably just ridiculous comment, because at 24 hours, everyone on the right was seeing guns where there were no guns. There he is pulling a gun. Oh, see that frame? He's got the gun in that hand. Oh, see him in the street? He's approaching them holding a gun. No, no, and no. He's not doing any of that. What we can talk about is a really interesting constitutional issue about, can you attend a protest with a
But that's the facts
that's
of
a
the case.
separate thing. Okay.
That's the facts of the case. How do they actually get these guys into custody and get them into a courtroom and have a judge say, yes, this is allowed?
2 ways. Negotiate with this administration. Argue that, hey, heads have to roll. This is out of control. I mean, we've got it. Somebody's got to be prosecuted for this. And someone who's guilty. Or here's another end run around it, I think. If you're Minnesota, you say, what are the odds we get a Democratic president in the next administration?
So you
or
just
actually
wait it
act
out?
with that. Wait it out forever, because murder has no statute of limitations.
Just wait it out till you get a favorable administration.
Someday, if it's 2030, if it's 2040, you might have a Democratic president.
But everybody knows that the longer you wait, yes, there is no statute of limitations, but there is a limit on evidence. It starts to expire. Witnesses.
Not here. I mean, you have everything you need from
maybe you
cameras.
can't find these guys. What if they're out of the country by then? What if
the
they're
defendants?
Yeah.
We have extraterritorial jurisdiction. Typically, unless they go to Russia or somewhere we don't have an extradition treaty with.
There's a lot of places. You could go to
North
Libya.
Korea.
You could go. There's more places than you think. Tunisia. I know people have. People have escaped to Tunisia.
Let's take the chance that these ICE agents who just signed up for this job, or whether they've been around for a while,
No,
they've
they're
been
probably
paying
not
government
leaving.
pay.
But it's still not ideal to wait 4 years to prosecute somebody for murder. We've seen this play out many times where you don't think so. I mean, it becomes more difficult.
When I think of, I think of the example, local police, if a suspect shoots someone, that person's handicapped in a wheelchair for the rest of their life, and then they die, frequently they'll charge that person 20 years later for causing the death, because, the bullet lodged in their spine eventually led to their death. And they're able to do that. And in this case, we have already 8 different camera angles. The only argument maybe an ICE agent would have is, that's not me in the picture. But, as long as it's an issue of identification, you go to some of the other agents, maybe get them to cooperate. I don't know. But I think the safest way for Minnesota would be, and of course they wouldn't get the political advantage because it would be years later, but you wait until there's a Democratic president and get him or her on board with this, and then you prosecute them.
What a platform to run on, a future president, right? Like a future Democratic presidential candidate could run on
holding people accountable in Minnesota.
Holding these two cases, the suspects in these 2 cases to account.
Yeah.
You could see that being a really powerful platform.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, how people have short memories. You wonder how many people will still, it's hard to imagine now because it's dominating the news cycle, but you wonder in 4 years or in 3 years, 2 years.
These police use of force cases, they tend to be sticky.
Yeah,
I mean,
they do.
I was just thinking about the one was actually sort of in a really, really roundabout way related to this, because you and I were both covering it for CNN, Freddie Gray.
Yes.
I don't think these 2 names are going to be erased from people's memories anytime soon.
No, Renee Good and Alex Preddy?
Yeah.
No, but I think Alex Preddy is far more egregious, and Alex Preddy has resulted in, as you said at the top of the show, that the usual 50-50 result or opinion on these videos has been skewed. It does feel like it's 70-30, 80-20 in favor of people saying that this is not a good shoot. And I just want to caution, I don't know if we're going to get into this now, but in my view, there are 2 very discrete events that happen in this arrest. So
I do think we should pivot. I do think we should pivot to the facts of the case now, because I think that's really important. And I'd like you to take it from here. I will just lead you a little bit. I'll lead the witness. Just because you and I have had conversations. We both watched the video, not together, but around the same time and we were talking about it.
Yep.
Your first takeaway was this doesn't look anything like law enforcement. This does not look like how
Yep.
law enforcement behaves.
Yes. Yes.
Why did you say that?
Number of reasons. First of all, when you watch the video and you see the one agent come over and he's intimidating the women or the other people off the street. And then out of nowhere, he just shoves her. And that just, I understand if they're under arrest, arrest them. Shoving them doesn't make a lot of sense, especially on slippery ice. Then you have the melee where they're taking him down. That is not appropriate. In fact, I was on last night with a former NYPD police chief, and he pointed out, I agreed with him, that for an arrest for subduing someone, you don't need that many officers. It actually is a too many cooks spoil the brew situation. It makes it less safe if you have 8 people, just nobody can do their job correctly. So that I think is problematic. The view where it looks like, it reminded me so much of the Rodney King video from 35 years ago, where you see for a few seconds, someone's just beating him with like a canister of OC spray or something.
Mm-hmm.
That, I understand you can use force in the way of including punches and kicks to subdue someone. There are a lot, the whole thing just looked like a gang beat up, and it didn't seem it didn't seem consistent with law enforcement principles when effecting an arrest. And I go back to the original shove of that woman. And by the way, when they first are arresting Alex Preddy, they're shoving him too. I don't know that shoving is part of subduing someone. You grab them. You go through the use of force pyramid. You use verbal commands. Stop, come here. You're under arrest. Then you use, physical display. Then you put your hands on someone. And I can't remember the exact use of force continuum, but it's common sense, right? You go through that. Just everything I saw about that didn't seem very professional. It didn't seem consistent with law enforcement practices. But I think we'll hear more about that in the coming days and weeks.
Did you even think that Alex Preddy warranted being detained?
So that's
Did his actions warrant?
So let's talk about 2 different events that we need to separate. Number one is the moment, and I talk about this all the time. So much of law enforcement, so much of criminal justice comes down to that moment in time when law enforcement decides to escalate to an arrest or escalate at least to a stop and frisk, a Terry stop, which is a much lower burden. All they need is articulable suspicion of a crime. However, we don't know yet what the ICE agents intended at the moment. And the moment I'm talking about is this. There's a moment when the ICE agent shoves the woman, and Alex Preddy puts his arm up to block her, to protect her. Let's concede that he was doing it to protect this woman. Let's concede for the moment that his motives were entirely noble. That is a problematic view. And I'm not saying this, I know this won't be a popular view for many, but here's the reality. When it comes to law enforcement effecting an arrest, and I don't know what kind of arrest that was, it looked like a shove, but it might have been an arrest. If it comes to anything with law enforcement performing their duties, I know you may say, and I'll agree with you, putting your arm up to protect someone doesn't seem like interference. But if you believe that, then walk around New York, see it, go up to a car stop, go up to someone, maybe pulling someone out of a car, and wave your hand in front of that officer's face. What do you think is going to happen? You're going to get arrested. Was what Alex Preddy did to the officer, where was it on the spectrum of force? Very low. But it doesn't need to be high to interfere with law enforcement activities. And that's what folks need to be aware of. Did they have grounds to arrest Alex Preddy? Not in the fashion they did, because that's part 2. Did they have grounds to arrest him for his act of putting his arm up, shielding, covering the woman, as noble as that would have been? And the answer is yes. And just do a thought experiment. If you walked out here on the streets of New York and you saw someone, an NYPD officer effecting an arrest, and you went up and you waved your arm in between him and the arrestee, what do you think is going to happen? I don't agree with the choice to arrest. I don't agree necessarily that was I believe the officer could have done something else, but that was enough for an arrest. It's what happened next that I think people have little reason. There seems to be very little to dispute that what happened next was a tragedy of error after error. And I cannot see any evidence of a warranted shooting. Certainly not 10 shots, not even 1 shot. But I can surmise where I think this is going to go.
Can I just stop you for a second?
Yeah.
The analogy you made, I get, and it's compelling. But that wasn't a situation where he's putting his hand up in between an officer and a person who's under arrest. That's a situation where he's putting his hand up in between a masked law enforcement official shoving a woman from behind onto the ground. He wasn't being arrested. She was being shoved.
You bring up a good point. However, so to that I would say that may ultimately be a distinction without a difference. You're right. If this was clearly an arrest, much stronger case. But you retreat back to the point that if an officer is performing their duties, and at that moment, as misguided as it may seem, his duty appeared to be shoving a woman who well, believe me, they're going to articulate that she was posing some kind of physical threat or not listening to commands. Now, did he skip the use of force continuum? Should he have maybe gone with verbal command? Maybe he was already doing that. Should he have gone with just, hands on her instead of the shove?
She was walking away and he shoved her.
Sure.
So it's not him trying to make an arrest.
Right. But here's the thing. You and I are talking about, you make a great moral point. I agree. But does that change that Alex Preddy put his hand right in front, his body and hand in front of an officer?
It doesn't.
Doing officer things. Let's just call it doing officer things.
I don't think officer things is shoving people who are walking away from you. I mean, she was actually.
But that's not his decision to make. It's not our decision to make.
But as a society, it will be.
It is.
Absolutely.
It is, but not.
She was actually listening to the commands to leave, right?
But this goes back.
She's leaving.
Right.
And
this goes back to a common refrain of mine, and I feel like it's often misunderstood. Don't bother the police. Don't get in their way. If you want to shout at them, do it from 50 yards away. I promise you nothing bad will ever happen, as long as you don't threaten them. 50 yards away, you want to yell at the police, good for you. I
mean, Alex Preddy wasn't 50 yards away, but he was 5 to 10 to 15 feet away, and bad things happened to him.
If police are doing police things, and you physically get in front of them, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. I'm not saying that everything I saw that officer doing was wrong.
Okay, but that's okay. So great. What about police doing not police things?
Great. So Alex Preddy is not Batman. He's not a vigilante. It's not his call to make in the moment. That's why I always say, eat the bust, no matter how, because it probably is unfair.
He did eat the bust.
Right.
He got down on the floor.
I agree. That's part two. And I agree. We're talking about the decision, the moment when the decision is made to arrest. Was that and by the way, I'm not even sure they were arresting him. Like, if he shouts, you're under arrest, that helps him. But if he's just in a shoving match with everybody, that's not good either. But here's the thing. It's not for Alex Preddy to determine who needs protection or who to help. I'm not saying this. I'm not saying this to scold Alex Preddy.
I get it. I know. I do know where you're coming from. But I just want to say, you always give the benefit of the doubt. Like, we can't slow down the frames of a video and make a decision in slow motion. Alex Preddy probably put his hand up instinctually.
Oh, I agree.
Like, oh my God, someone just got shoved from behind, and I'm sure he wasn't thinking, well, is it my place to decide if this police officer is using excessive force or not? No, his arm went up because he was like,
okay,
holy shit.
That's true. Let's say that's true.
It is.
Let's say it was involuntary. Let's say it was completely involuntary. The agent doesn't know that. He can't make that assessment in that moment. All he knows is that a body and an arm is in front of him. Now, again, nothing about that looked good. But I want people to be ready for the fact, and also understand that there's this sort of growing view that if you really don't like what law enforcement's doing, you can get in their face. No, that is really not what the freedom of assembly is about. It's not what the freedom of speech is about. You can protest, and we can talk about that. The framers loved protests. They talked about it all the time, and they had the Boston Tea Party, which arguably was more violent than what Alex Preddy was doing, right? They took property and threw it into the bay, into the Boston Harbor.
I don't think anything he did was violent. He didn't do anything violent.
I just said it was more violent than anything Alex. All right, Alex Preddy didn't do anything violent, right? Yeah. However, I should say, at least from a use of force analysis, and again, this is just the cold hard facts. I'm not saying this because I agree with what happened. Putting your arm and your body in front of a law enforcement officer doing law enforcement officer things it's impeding. It's a federal statute. It's an 8-year felony, Section 111, I believe. 18 U.S.C. Section 111, impeding a federal agent in their duties. Would you agree putting your arm and body in front of an agent doing anything in the course of his duties is impeding?
Yes,
right. 8-year felony. So now, believe me, this is the way that if there ever is a defense, this is how it's going to go. Now they have him theoretically, and I'm doing air quotes if you're just listening, Theoretically, you have him on a federal felony, an 8-year felony, section 111, impeding a federal officer. So then you get to arrest, and then you get to the fact that he's carrying, now we're in part 2, that you observe that he has a firearm. So a lot of people are talking about, is it fair? Can somebody go to a protest with a lawful firearm? The answer to that is yes. And there's actually a really interesting discussion that involves more constitutional parts than I've ever dealt with. No, really. Because that implicates the First Amendment, freedom of assembly and speech. It implicates the Second Amendment, firearms. It implicates the Fourth Amendment. Can police just come up to you if you have an open carry firearm at a protest? Fourth Amendment, search and seizure, and to some degree the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment.
Or is it concealed?
This was Minnesota has it's a conceal carry. You have to be licensed. He was licensed.
But it was concealed.
Yes.
It's not open.
No, right. It was concealed. Yeah, but I think Minnesota, I believe they don't make a distinction. I think they're open and concealed is the same.
Okay.
So I believe. I could be wrong. But, and also they have an obligation to disclose it if they're asked. Not immediately. This is important too, I think. I mean, I don't think Alex Preddy had a legal obligation like you would in other states. As soon as you have an encounter with an officer, you have to disclose, I have a concealed carry permit.
I mean,
but
if
I don't
he
believe
had
in
shouted, I have a gun in the scrum,
I don't think
he would have died
right. No,
even sooner. Like, there's no...
You look at part 2, the scrum, where they're all just beating him down. Was there anything he even did affirmatively one way or another that invited the shooting? No. But part 2 is where it gets even trickier, because this is the standard used when it comes to deadly force. If they wanted to charge those agents, Minnesota prosecutors would have to disprove. They would have the burden to disprove that those agents had no reasonable belief, even if they were mistaken. They can be mistaken as long as it's reasonable why they believe they needed to discharge their own firearm. So they can be wrong as long as that belief was reasonable. And so what I expect you're going to hear, the narrative you're going to hear in the coming weeks is, we saw you had a firearm. I saw an empty holster. Because remember, apparently the firearm was removed by another agent. But going back to police procedure, because they had so many people in this rugby scrum, probably, I'm guessing, an agent didn't see that the gun was removed. So they see an empty holster and they think maybe he has the gun out. They probably saw a cell phone. Mistaken. But if it's reasonable, it's a justified use of force. And I say that, and it pains me to say that, because everything about this looked wrong. Part 1, little less, I don't want to say sympathy, but part 1, agents had a little more justification, impeding the actions of a federal agent. But the arrest, boy, there is very little to justify the use of deadly force there. But I promise you, what you're going to hear in the coming weeks is a version of what I just said.
There's a still screenshot of the video from the moment the first shot is fired. And Alex Preddy is literally shot execution style.
In his back.
Yeah, he's hands and knees on the ground, looking away, and they shoot him from behind.
He did nothing other than get on all fours. After he had got, by the way, after he had OC spray in his face, and I've been thinking about it, all right, so what is the best thing he could have done? And I don't even know if it would have, I guess it would have been lie down on the freezing wet sidewalk with your cheeks on the concrete and your hands interlaced behind your back on your head.
But they never told him he was under arrest.
We don't know yet.
No, we heard everything in the video. You don't hear any words that sound like police.
No, I agree.
They just all of a sudden move away and they start shooting him.
Yeah.
I mean, and this brings me
terrible.
to one of my points, which is, I really think it's important to talk about the evidence in this video of how poorly trained these ICE agents are. And I think there is a lot of anecdotal evidence to support the idea that federal authorities are just hiring anybody very, very quickly. There's a reporter who went to an ICE recruiting event in Texas and got hired within 6 minutes, failed the drug test, didn't submit the background check, and still got the letter saying, hey, join us. There's other anecdotal evidence of pardoned rioters who are joining ICE. You hear them on videos from bystanders saying, oh, it's like Call of Duty, ha, ha, ha. So you've got all of this anecdotal evidence to show that these are not well-trained, well-meaning law enforcement officers.
Just look at the video.
Yeah. And so I think that there is a possibility I think that, first of all, I think that's a really important point to make. And I think there's a greater culpability there that the government isn't spending the time to make sure that things are done right. I think there's a degree, this might be a little controversial, but I think there's a degree of excitement around the idea that they are going to be instigators. And I mean excitement from that political
I think that's possible.
institution that
Yeah.
like, the fact that Alex Preddy died just a few weeks after Renee Good, knowing everyone is watching, all of these cell phone cameras, would you say 8 angles already or
Seems
something like that?
And there are more to come. There are body cams, assuming the federal government doesn't disappear them, which would be terrifying, but it's a possibility.
Everybody knows that that they're being watched. All these ICE agents know they're being watched.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
And they still act like this.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's necessarily a mistake. I think there's a possibility that they're doing this because they're being filmed.
Let me just say, let me just throw a couple thoughts at you,
Okay.
because I largely agree with you, and I don't do this just to be a pot stir or a
No, I
contrarian.
am a little bit, well, I'm not saying I'm trying to be a pot stir. I just think, at least partially, they are instigators who want this to escalate. They knew that all eyes were on them. They knew they know
That's
this
the thing
is
that blows me away. Yeah, they know that they have to be on their best behavior. People are,
and they're
filming
not
things
on their
they've never
best
before,
behavior.
right?
They're not even
Agreed.
trying to be on their best
No,
behavior.
that
They're not even close to their best behavior.
But can I just say this, and maybe it's a public service announcement: leave law enforcement alone. And I say this as a criminal defense attorney because here is the way the use of force continuum works. By the way, this was not a scheduled protest. These were people just running up and bothering law enforcement. I'm not saying that law enforcement are always right. I'm a criminal defense attorney. And my job is to be suspicious of law enforcement. This is what I know from having practiced in this area for a while, is that if you go up and get in the face of police officers, the calculus changes there. It becomes a world in which their opinion matters more than yours. And if they perceive a threat, whatever it may be, even if it's a 40-year-old woman, right, who is nowhere near in the physical shape of the agent, no matter what, they're trained. People need to understand they're trained that anybody can hurt them at any time, assuming these guys were trained that. But and if they're in this environment, by the way, maybe there's some command structure that's responsible too, because they are placing these people in this environment where they know Minnesotans are angry. They're also in an environment where they seem to be getting little, if any, help from local police who don't approve. Apparently, the local government doesn't approve of what they're doing. So while I agree with you that everything about this points to poor training, poor deployment, there's also an element of, if people take away nothing else from this, what I hope they would take away is don't mess with the police. If you want to protest them, do it from 50 yards away. Shout, hell no, we won't go. Shout whatever reductionist chant you want to from 50 yards away. Film them from 50 yards away and zoom in on your phone. If you get in their physical space, they are taught, they are trained that you are a threat. Doesn't matter how old you are, how frail you are, it doesn't matter. And that noise that you make in their face, they can perceive that potentially as a threat. And by the way, let's say you are legally in the right. Let's say you're 8 feet away and filming them, and constitutionally speaking, you were in the right. Maybe like Alex Preddy, it appears, was standing in the street, waving traffic through, filming them. Let's say he has some constitutional remedy. Who cares now? He's dead. His family lost him. So that's why it worries me when I see protesters who are like, well, they're thinking probably, and I think in a misguided way, even though they may be legally correct, I have a right to be here. I have a right to film them. You do. But what good is that going to do us if you get shot and killed and later we sue and show that you were right? Oh, good for you.
I think it's somewhat playing into what the extreme right wants, which is they don't want to de-escalate.
Here's what I think. I think you're right. Here's how I imagine it. I imagine you have these ICE agents who are not well trained. They're kind of an amalgam of some have experience. Others are, like you said, just hired off the street recently. But they've very quickly cultivated it's us against the world. And they're not incorrect. I mean, they are out there. The president ain't there. They're, Tom Homan's heading there now, but they, who knows how much command structure is there backing them up. Every element, local law enforcement, local government, the people, everyone's against them. They probably feel at night when they are in the hotel like they're in Vietnam, like it's us against the entire country. And that, I'm not saying that that's justified. I know what you're thinking, but I'm saying psychologically, then you get out there, but you have to understand, then you get out there and that's what they're thinking.
I mean,
I'm not justifying
it. If it's you against the world, maybe you should rethink your
totally
strategy,
agree. Totally
your position.
But you're right. And it goes back to your point. Why did they take this job? I mean, it's a job.
Yeah,
and it
why did they
pays.
take this job? Maybe they didn't
Well,
have,
it pays.
I happen to be very close family friends with two long time, decades long
Yep.
DHS officials. That's not these people.
No,
These
it's not.
people are
No,
people
of
who
course
are
not.
otherwise unemployable.
You could be right. Yes. But for whatever reason, again, I'm not saying that this is morally correct. For whatever reason, that's probably the thinking. So where you say we're pretty close. You're saying it's them being instigators or for some of them, it may be, look, I wanted to make a few bucks. This was a job. I was unemployable anywhere else. I get to stay in a hotel. I get some money. But the one thing is I go out there and it's us against me and my bunk buddy. And
that
everyone else
make
is
you
trying
want
to
to
kill
shoot
us.
people, though. I think that the only reason you would want to make it Call of Duty, the only reason you would want to start unloading your magazine is that you want to escalate, not because you think it's you against everyone.
Or you're scared. Well,
if you're scared, quit your job and go home.
Well, if you're scared in that environment, that's an argument I've heard made. But again, law enforcement is trained early on. Anyone's potentially a threat. What I expect you'll hear, empty holster, something dark in his hand, maybe it was cell phone, maybe glasses, someone shouted gun, bang, bang, bang. And by the way, I hate to tell you folks, from a use of force perspective, that could be enough. If you couple that with the fact that they'll make the argument, and before you roll your eyes through your head, they'll make the argument that this was someone who they had witnessed commit a federal felony of impeding.
I don't even think they knew what what statute did you say it was?
Absolutely.
They don't know it.
Absolutely.
These guys are not trained.
Absolutely. They know they can arrest someone for impeding. No, they know that. They know they can. That minimum, they've been told that. Otherwise, they know they can affect. By the way, they don't normally have that kind of arrest power. They only have the power to arrest people interfering with them. They can't go out and start writing, parking tickets or jaywalking tickets or alcohol tickets or things like that. That's not what they do.
All right, Danny, I would say I'll see you at dinner, but I think we're going to be having dinner in an airport tonight, so I'll see you at the airport.
I'll see you at TSA.
TSA. Oh, great. Department of Homeland Security. Fun. Bye.
Bye.
Much of the country is thawing out after this massive snowstorm that impacted 2/3 of the country. But the snow is not really the biggest concern. It's
No,
ice.
it is. It is ice.